Okay. All right. I think we're good. I'm not seeing any drops, so hopefully this is working. This is working. Okay. I think we're back on track now. I just had to switch the servers, it looks like, and I think it kicked right back in. So, welcome to another movie review stream. My name is Mark McPherson. I am film critic for a film critic for movieswithmark.com, TwinCitiesGeek.com, and FilmInquiry.com. So, what do we got today? Well, we got 3 films to review for the Halloween season. We have 3 horror films. We've got Five Nights at Freddy's, the movie based on the hit video game. Sorry, I got screwed up after all the technical issues here. We'll also be reviewing VHS 85, the latest in the VHS horror anthology series, and we'll be taking a look at The Nun 2, a horror film from last month that I'm just now catching up on. But before we go any further, if you'd like the stream, if you would like to see early reviews, I know I'm not doing the reviews of Five Nights at Freddy's as early, but I mean, we had a Thursday embargo, so it got kind of weird, so there you go. But if you want to see earlier reviews, because we got a lot of big awards films coming up this fall, so be sure to stick around for that. But without further ado, we will get to the reviews for this week for Halloween. So we'll, of course, get into the big one here. Five Nights at Freddy's. Let me get up my notes here. And get a drink of water. I get one more thing off to the side here. Okay. I think we're good. I'm not seeing any drops in the frames here. That's what I was worried about, but it looks like we're okay. Looks good. All right. Now that that's out of my mind. All right. So let me get my notes up here. And okay. All right. Here we go. Reviewing Five Nights at Freddy's in 3, 2, 1. So, Five Nights at Freddy's is the latest horror film based on the hit video game with a whole lot of lore behind it. So I think, like, I have a little bit of a knowledge of Five Nights at Freddy's, but obviously not as much as the crowd that I saw this with, because they picked up on every little bit, every little Easter egg, and there's a lot of Easter eggs. Like, that's probably an understatement. I mean, watching this film, at least from my perspective of the limited knowledge that I do have of Five Nights at Freddy's, which I will willingly admit to while watching this, it felt like watching a film that was kind of like, oops, all Easter eggs, and it's just like all this referential stuff. But I kind of said this with my Super Mario review, is that I felt like it was a bit too like that video game film was a bit too passive, and it had like a lot of it doled out a lot of Easter eggs and a lot of fan service. But I was okay with most of it. So, like, you know what, it's being playful, and it's still a coherent story, and it's a lot like, it's the same way I felt about Sonic the Hedgehog. I didn't really like Sonic the Hedgehog all that much either, but it's still like, it's fine. Like, it's still a competent story. I can tell you, I can recognize the beginning, middle, and end. I can see, what the hero wants, what the villain wants, and it's a cohesive enough story where if someone wasn't familiar with the games, they could just walk right into these films and totally understand what's going on. I have played like the first game, and I have a little bit of knowledge of like some of this other lore, but like having just that knowledge, this film was completely incoherent to me, and it's mostly because once you start thinking about how this plot unfolds, this entire story, it's just like there's so many gaping holes with it that just like, you can't, that like I couldn't quite ignore it. And it's like, and it's one of those things where it's a film that it's clearly loaded up with a lot of stuff that fans love, because fans were just cheering, going nuts for it. I saw it with like, all the fans surrounding me. So obviously they picked up on everything, but I was still just kind of a little bit in the dark. And I know that, like, for fans of the games, and who have played all the games, who have read all the books and the comic books, they'll pick up on everything. Where I know their immediate response to that response is that, well, you should play all the games, you should pick up on all the lore, you should watch all the YouTube videos, you should read through some of the books, so you can understand all the references that are being doled out on screen. But the thing is, if you want people to do that, you have to make a film that's at least like accessible. That's why we get, that's why we get so many comic book movies. A lot of these, the Marvel and the DC films, for the ones that are coherent and people, gravitate towards, they're made in a way where you don't have to have all this foreknowledge coming in to recognize and enjoy the film. And at least for me, while I was watching Five Nights at Freddy's, it felt like I was so much in the dark here. And it feels like it shouldn't, because, like the original game, it was a simple thing. It's a security guard. He's got to survive 5 nights, and animatronics at this, creepy Chuck E. Cheese place, are coming to kill him, and he's got to find a way to survive those 5 nights. Simple survival stuff, like, it's a simple enough story where, like, you could, just on that, I think if you just focus on like that first game as a film, there's a lot that you could build up the darkness with that, the anticipation, the uncertainty, you could just keep it going, and just the anticipation that the animatronics are going to come out and kill this security guard. That's a pretty good film right there, maybe even like a short film. But it felt like this film had to cover so much, and covered so much ground with all these characters, that it just shoved it all into like this incoherent mess that it rarely had a lot of time to, like, to get to know and like care for these characters, to see if they'll survive all this, let alone understand anything that's going on here. Because like there's a lot on the plate for the main character here of Mike Schmidt, played by Josh Hutcherson. He's a dude who's been traumatized, since he was a kid, because his brother was taken away from him. He's trying to care for his sister, but he's in a custody battle. He's low on funds. He can't maintain a job. He's worried about paying off his house. He's traumatized that it affects everything that he does at his security jobs. So he's given one last chance, to work at, Freddy's, this long abandoned, creepy pizza entertainment chain with animatronics there, to prove himself. And that's right there. That's enough. That's plenty to build on with that character. If you show how everything progresses there, where, like, you show the concerns about money, you show the frustrations with maintaining his family. He has problems connecting with his sister Abby, played by Piper Rubio, does a pretty good job here. So there's a lot just on that. And then, you throw in the creepy animatronics, and, just having these nightmares about his brother being abducted. That's enough to build on. But we don't get time to appreciate any of that. And as a result, it feels like it's just kind of like zooming through like a lot of these archetypes really quickly, just so that we can get to the intricate animatronics of the Freddy's Fazbear's Pizza, which, to their credit, they're made by like the Jim Henson Creature Workshop, and they are definitely the best thing about this film. They're they look like they do in the games. They're fairly expressive. They're detailed. They move well enough, and they move believably, and in a way where you could believe like they're animatronics with how they're framed. They are definitely the best part of the film. Unfortunately, that's kind of like a sign of what type of film this is going to be, because like the Jim Henson Workshop, usually when they make, those, like life-size animatronics and puppets like that, those are usually highly, highly intricate puppets that, they're going to be worried about, that's like nothing's going to happen to them. So I knew for certain, like, nothing violent is going to happen to these things, and they're probably not going to do anything all that violent to their victims that, break into their establishment and they try to kill, that isn't going to be like off screen, or, they're going to throw in like some CGI on top of that. Like, clearly these animatronics are not going to be doing a lot. In fact, there's a scene where Mike comes up to one with like with a chair with the intent to like smash it over one of them. And I knew the moment that he started doing that, it's like, he's not going to do that. That there is no way that they would let him do it with these animatronic puppets. Because I thought that was like the one thing that would surprise me if they actually like tried to smash up these puppets, and like showed like like the parts of them coming off and showed like their creepy endoskeletons inside. That would go the extra mile to make them creepy, but at the same time, it's like they're very intricate. I doubt they're going to go that far, and sure enough, they didn't here. And the other thing too is with how like progressively quick it goes through all these elements, it forgets a lot about what's like the motivations of a lot of these characters. Like at one point, Mike meets Vanessa, a local police officer played by Elizabeth Lale, and you immediately know she's up to something. Like there's not even like there's not even like a moment where you feel like, oh, this is someone I can trust. Like the moment that she shows up and she's just kind of casually brushing off the fact that Mike got stabbed in one of his dreams and just acts like, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place is just still like a fun place, even though it's like creepy and abandoned, and this chipper attitude she has to everything, you immediately know that something is up. The same goes for Matthew Lillard's character, who, when he first shows up as this guy trying to get Mike his job, you immediately know he's up to something creepy, and that there's some, big reveal with Mike, the way, like, that he doesn't quite say his entire name, just the way he acts, which, I mean, fair enough. Matthew Lillard is pretty good in, like, creepy roles. That's what you want him for. But it's just, like, much like with Hutcherson here, he's served up a script that just, it does him no favors. Matthew Lillard is barely in the film, and the few scenes he gets, he's delivered kind of dialogue that he's, it feels like he's trying to make like lemonade out of rocks here with what he's given to work with. That it feels like, they're so beholden to sticking to everything that needs to be in this film that I don't feel like they can really develop much as characters, which is kind of in stark contrast when you have Aunt Jane, who's Mike's aunt, trying to wrestle away Abby for custody. She's played by Mary Stuart Masterson, who, I swear, with her and like the lawyer character, it feels like they were given notes and told that this was going to be a comedy. So you got to like play it up as like, exaggerated and ridiculous as you can, which, if that was their intent, like they do the best that they can. Like, I mean, I like the little touches with Masterson, with how like at one point she meets at a diner and she's like, being very physical around her lawyer, and at one point she just like steals a whole bunch of like sugar packets when the scene ends. Just little touches like that where it felt like a completely different film. And this is one of those things, like, I want to stress, like, every actor here is doing their best with the roles they're given. It's just the script is so, like, it's garbage, because it doesn't firmly establish these characters. There's more questions than what's revealed with them. Like the whole deal with Mike losing his brother in Nebraska, but we never quite settle on like where the state that they're currently in is at. Not to mention, they're vacationing in Nebraska. So, like, what was the context of that? Not to mention, like, when the central villain is revealed by the very end, there's still a lot of questions that I don't quite understand. Like, I don't know why the villain is, murdering children who are like ghost children coming into these like animatronic puppets. Like, what's the intent with, like, his Muppet murder factory here? Because, like, like, with other video game films that I haven't been that big on, I can tell you what Dr. Robotnik's intent is. I can tell you what Bowser's intent is in the Super Mario Brothers movie. I can't tell you what the villain of this film is trying to do. And I'm sure there is an answer that, if I went through all the games and I read through all the books and I looked up, like YouTube theory videos and looked on the Wikipedia articles, I could probably figure out the answer through there. But if the film itself can't give an answer for why the villain does the things that the villain does, that's not the fault of the viewer for not picking up on that. And the thing is, like, these issues could be, they could all be forgiven, if there was like at least like some, like if I was like getting more into like the atmosphere, if like if there were some good kills or some creepy atmosphere, something more engaging to make me forget about all like these gaping plot holes, then that would work. That would actually be up for that. But because like the film is trying to cover so many story beats, insert so much lore, and just cover all like these Easter eggs and references that all the fans are clearly going to get, and everyone who hasn't done all their homework and studied up on it is not going to recognize this stuff. It's like night and day. Like, fans are just going to be loving, because like, oh, I get the reference, and everyone else who hasn't, studied up on all the Five Nights at Freddy's research is just going to be like, wait, why was the villain doing this? Wait, how does the dream logic work here? Like, so do the ghost children respond to the drawings, or what is happening here? Not to mention, like I said, like, it's not that scary with what it sets up, but it's also got like an off tone. Like, there's moments where it's trying to be cute with the puppets, where it's just trying to, make them more friendly, which I could almost buy if it were for the fact that, like, there's a moment where like there's kind of like an innocence that gets evoked, but it immediately goes from just like creepy to playful. And there isn't that moment where just like, Mike kind of has like that connection with the kids, which I feel like this film would benefit if it just slowed down and just gave enough time to appreciate what the characters are doing here. Because, like, Mike, having lost his little brother and, fearing that he's dead, and wanting a chance to reconnect again, that would have been a perfect connection between him and the animatronics, since they're all possessed by ghost children, and sort of give him a little bit of, like, closure to that degree. But it just kind of gets forgotten over the course of just, finding extra stuff for the characters to do and injecting more and more of the lore into it, as though the film is just like a laundry list of stuff it's got to cover, and it's got to like tick every single box here. Because like I've said in my review of like the Super Mario Brothers movie, where I felt like, the best way that most people are going to enjoy it is if, like, they came in with like a mental checklist of everything that this film had to do to satisfy the fans, by like, oh, they have to bring up this character, they have to reference, this event, this location, they have to bring up, this line, these things that I recognize from the game, that you'll be able to love it more. Here with Five Nights at Freddy's, I feel like you almost have to. You have to come in with that laundry list of everything that you recognize from the games, because I feel like because all the fans are just pointing at the screen. It's like, I recognize that. Oh wait, I remember this from the game. Which, to his credit, I'm glad that all the kids were enjoying that. Getting to point out everything here. But as for myself, just kind of as someone who hasn't picked up on all the lore, if you're in the dark, you want a film to, kind of get you interested to go check it out for yourself, so that, so that you're intrigued enough, or it's like, oh, I'm curious, what is this character doing, and how does this relate to what the animatronics were doing, and what's up with that lore? Like, you should be interested. Here it almost feels like a threat. Like, if you don't understand this stuff, it's just like, well, you have to go into the games and read that. And, then it feels like you have to do homework to come in just to understand what is happening in the film. Not even to find it entertaining, just to understand what is even going on and what all the references are. But even on that level of just like trying to, connect how all this stuff in the movie relates to the lore and the franchise and the games, and the YouTube theories and, like the YouTubers they push into the film, even if recognizing all that, it still doesn't, the film itself still has a lot of problems. Like, I never really liked Mike as a character. I didn't like that everything had to be spoon-fed to him, where it felt like he was, even though he's like the central hero here, it felt like he was a passenger in the story, where it's like he doesn't get to look up the research on Freddy's. he doesn't understand all the logic about the ghost kids and the animatronics. Like, everything has to be explained to him in a manner where, I almost kind of empathize with Mike, because like he's coming in here and so it's like, oh, you don't know the Freddy lore? Well, here, I'm gonna explain everything to you. Like that one person next to you in the theater is just like, okay, but well, this relates to that, and that, here that this relates to like the third game where you saw, and it just goes on and on like that throughout the film. So obviously fans are probably gonna like this film. Fans probably were going to like this film from like before they saw the first frame of it. But as someone who's only played, one of the games and has like a very tertiary knowledge of this franchise, the film is just like a mess. Like, it's all over the place. I couldn't really understand the intent of a lot of the characters, and I didn't feel that I got to spend enough time with them to care about whether or not they would survive all this, let alone understand the mechanics and the intent of the murderous Muppet pizza factory here. Which, and like I said, I'm not looking for anything like intricate or detailed that has to be fully explained. Just a little bit of like coherence, that this story is like building on something as opposed to just being an and then story. Because like, a compelling film would be like, oh, well, this character did this, and that leads to this happening, which leads to this happening, which leads to this happening. And this is very much and then this happens, and then this happens, and then there's this reference, and then there's this character, and then there's this character, and then there's this reference, and it just keeps piling on top of itself, and it doesn't really build on anything, that it just kind of forgets about so much that it sets up in the film. So I wish I could be with this film, but honestly, when compared to like something like Willy's Wonderland, which I was kind of like okay with, which is, a lot of people saw as like the knockoff Five Nights at Freddy's. I actually kind of like Willy's Wonderland a little bit more after seeing Five Nights at Freddy's, because again, I can tell you what the hero is doing in that film. I can tell you what the villains are doing in that film, and I can tell you the backstory that they establish within Willy's Wonderland. But Five Nights at Freddy's, it feels like I have to do homework just to, understand everything that's happening here, let alone, finding it entertaining. So yeah, this movie's just a mess. So Five Nights at Freddy's, currently playing in theaters everywhere. And will probably be there for a while, because it was like a 70 million, I think it opened at. I know it was like 130 worldwide. But even if it did half that, it's a horror film. Horror films usually have legs. Like was it a few weeks ago, Exorcist the Believer? It wasn't a huge hit at the theater, but it didn't cost that much. So it still made a profit. But yeah, strictly for the fans, I would say, which I'm sure many fans would take as a compliment, because they're like, only fans are going to be able to enjoy this, and fans are going to be like, thank you. Of course it will. Which, good for them, All right. Well, let's get to another horror film. Let's get to VHS 85. Get up all of the notes here. All right. And a little extra water here. Oh, Five Nights at Freddy's also playing on Peacock if you can't make it out to the theater. And you just have to check it out. Okay. All right, so here we go with VHS 85 in 3, 2, 1. So VHS 85 is the latest entry in the VHS horror anthology series, which honestly, I've been a little bit impressed with how this anthology has kind of improved itself over time. Like, among all the VHS anthology films, like, I really didn't like the first one. I felt it was really rocky with the stories that it presented of, people finding cursed VHS tapes and, just finding strange and weird stuff that happens within them. But I like the concept. And the fact that it's an anthology series means that, you never know what you're going to get with the next entry. And sure enough, VHS 2 that followed was actually easily one of my favorites of the franchise, just 'cause amazing talent behind it, found weird and bizarre stuff to do with it. And then we got, was the third one called like VHS Viral, and that one wasn't very good. But then we got another one that was pretty good, and it's kind of been building itself up more and more. And VHS 85, I can thankfully say, has a really good batting average in terms of like, the stories presented and what they explore. And I love the serialization that goes on within this entry in particular. So the framing device here is that, it's, a whole bunch of, footage mashed together here, but there's a connecting story referred to as, well, it's referred to in a report as a total copy, where they investigate this weird entity that's discovered in a university lab called Rory, and they're doing experiments on it, trying to figure out what this creature is, and you get to slowly see that creature become more and more intelligent and sentient and reactive to everything around it. So there's a great payoff at the end with that. In between that footage is a whole bunch of smaller stories, and one of the things that really impressed me was that one of the writer and directors here, Mike P. Nelson, actually does two stories here. And they collide with each other in a beautiful way. Like the first story is called No Wake, which is about a group of young people who go off on a vacation by the lake, and they end up getting shot at, and they're all shot, and it seems like they're killed, except something in the lake makes them immortal, and they realize that they're still alive, even though like their jaws are hanging off and like brains are coming out of their head. And it's just like a freaky and bizarre scenario where, you don't realize that you're alive, and you can't quite figure it out until you kind of connect all the pieces. And that story comes back later. After a few other entries, it comes back in the story Ambrosia, in which we do figure out who the attackers were who were shooting at them off the lake. And we get a much different story that, of like a death cult that kind of collides a little bit with what happened with the survivors of that story. So I didn't know that going in, so hopefully this isn't like a big spoiler here, but I loved how just there was that surprise of like, here's one story and then here's a different story, but they both connect, which is something I didn't quite expect out of the VHS anthology. And it was so good. I love the way that it built up and how it had surprise with it, that I almost wish that I feel like it should be like a requirement that every VHS anthology should have the writer and directors make two entries and decide whether or not they connect, just because I think it's, I don't know, at least for me, this really worked. I thought it was a lot of fun. But the singular segments here are pretty good. I love the framing of God of Death, which is framed as like a Mexican news broadcast that an earthquake sends the people fleeing down into the basement and going further and further into the earth, where they unleash the terror of this god that's lied beneath there, and then weird and freaky stuff happens. They get stabbed and brutalized. And they're like filming the whole thing while there's a disaster going on. So just beautiful framing there, from like, going from newsroom cameras to, going deeper into like the depths of, finding this bizarre horror awaiting them. A little bit more of an experimental one is Technog. I'm trying to pronounce it correctly, but it's essentially a performance art piece directed by Natasha Kermani, in which this woman tries to, display that there is no spirituality within virtual reality, tries to call out, any type of god that might exist, and she gets some horrific results when she finds it, while doing a live performance. So there's like, there's that speculation of, how much of this is staged, and, which effects are like real and which ones are not. So like there's I mean, you kind of get an idea of like, that she is being brutalized at one point during the performance, or but still, for the audience to react the way that they do, it's a pretty clever bit. And then finally, in addition to like Total Copy, the last one here is definitely the longest segment, called Dream Kill, directed by Scott Derrickson and co-written by C. Robert Cargill. You might know these two. They originally did the horror film Sinister, and they did another film called The Black Phone from last year. And Dreamkill is actually pretty intriguing as like a mystery. This is a film that, you know, like it's posed as a short film, but you could almost see this as a full feature, just because it keeps you just enough in the dark, because the whole premise is that somebody is videotaping themselves breaking into people's houses and murdering them, and then sending the tapes to the police officers investigating this. So the police try to track down who's sending them the tapes, how they're getting them, what the connection is between, you know, who is doing the filming and who's being murdered. And it's actually woven together pretty brilliantly, where it rides that line between being like, you know, a thrilling murder mystery and being like, you know, a supernatural terror of like, you know, weird, you know, like evoking the weirdness of technology, where, you know, like these horrific dreams take shape around the format of VHS. So yeah, it was a very, very clever bit. I almost feel like I'm of two minds, because like I said, it could be its own feature film, but at the same time, as a short film, I feel like it works so well here. And it's perfectly positioned right at the end here, where we are ready for some more experimentation here. Like we've had, like, you know, we saw like the bit with the newsroom in on the Mexican broadcast, then we see the virtual reality, and then we get, you know, experimentation with dreams and VHS recordings, and just creepy tapes in general. So yeah, like this is definitely, I think, one of the more experimental VHS entries. And comparing it to the other ones, I think I really, really like this one. I'm not quite sure if I liked it more than the previous VHS film, VHS 99, just because I like the gimmick around that specific point in time, and I feel like they nailed it perfectly. There are a few moments in 85 where I feel like it's trying like a little bit too hard to remind you of the 80s, but only in bits and pieces. Mostly just because, like, they intercut, like, you know, commercials that feel fitting of the era. And I feel like they only do that just because, like, they aren't, like, trying too hard in the segments themselves to, you know, like, prove to you that it's, you know, that it's the mid-1980s. Like, at one point, somebody mentions a Stephen King book, and they're like, you know, it's, you know, like, oh, have you read this story? It's like, well, it's fairly new. They push it a little bit in there. But yeah, like, in terms of trying to like capture, just like I can't quite speak of like they capture the era well, but they do find good stories to frame through this device here. That actually I really dug it. So while I don't love it as much as VHS 99, I love the concepts that they present here, and like I said, I love the serialization with like the whole total copy thing, and the, you know, the connection between No Wake and Ambrosia that Mike P. Nelson weaves together so brilliantly here. Like I said, I would love to see, even if it's just one writer-director, do 2 segments next time for VHS, just so that we can have that fun little connection there throughout. I'm not saying that all the segments have to connect together. I just like having a few of them cross paths here and there. Just, I don't know. It's a fun way to like keep retooling this anthology and just keep coming up with new ideas so that it always feels fresh. And, you know, between this and like the last VHS entry, you know, I've been very impressed with what I've seen in this horror anthology, and I can't wait to see what they do next. So VHS 85 is currently playing on Shudder. I believe it played at a few festivals a few weeks ago. So I know, like at the local Twin Cities Fest, it played there, but yeah, check it out at home on Shudder. I probably should have mentioned that too when I started doing this. That, yeah, you can watch all these films on streaming right now. So let's see, one of the comments here. I will say I like the cinematography in Freddy's. For the most part, yeah. Like I questioned why they had the vacation in Nebraska, but at the same time, it's one of those things where it's like on like a filmmaking level, I kind of get it, because like the big trees and everything, they look intimidating to film there. So like the way that it looks, yeah, it's great. But at the same time, it's like, why are you vacationing in Nebraska? what, where do you live, and how do you... I assume that like maybe they have like family there or something. I don't know. It's a lot of loose ends that they don't wrap up there. And finally, let's get to the final review of the night, The Nun 2. Mm-hmm. All right. So here we go in 3, 2, 1. So The Nun 2 is the sequel to 2018's The Nun, which was itself a spin-off of the Conjuring universe, because that always seems to happen with these Conjuring films. You know, there's always that one creepy figure that becomes iconic enough that it gets its own film. You know, like, you know, it happened with Annabelle, and now it's happened with The Nun. And now we're on to the sequel to The Nun. And I'll be honest, like, I really didn't care much for the first Nun movie, just because it had some decent scares here and there, like, you know, like this creepy, you know, church out in the middle of nowhere, and like there's this demonic nun who's got like, you know, like the black eyes and the teeth, and, you know, she's got like the veil of darkness around her, and she looms in the shadows, and you could just kind of see that creepy pale visage from, you know, from a distance, and it looks fairly creepy. But there's only so much you can do with that in that type of setting that it kind of didn't surprise me as much that for the third act of The Nun, it pretty much just became like a tomb raiding Indiana Jones style adventure, where it's just like, we've got to unearth the creepy the creepy traps of the nun and, like, you know, undo the curse. And thankfully, The Nun 2, it feels a lot more grounded, I think, than the first Nun film, because it feels like this one had more of a plan, and has like a firmer grounding in the, you know, in the religious setting. Like I love how, you know, they go between different locations, but they also make it take place at, like, you know, like a religious boarding school. So they get the setting right. You do have like returning characters here, like you have Taissa Farmiga is back as Sister Irene, and she's a little bit more skilled now, having dealt with the demonic nun before. So when, you know, the church calls her up and says, "Hey, we got another demon nun problem. Can you go check it out?" She's like, "Okay, you know, this went a little dark the last time I did it, but I'll give it a shot." And of course, she gets like premonitions, and she gets like a test of faith when she is paired up with a kind of like a novice nun of Sister Deborah, played by Storm Reed. And I really liked her in this role, with how, like, you know, she's there to kind of like question like Sister Irene, and kind of like, you know, more or less kind of become like an audience surrogate to like question what's going down, and, you know what's going to be needed to defeat this demonic nun, which is a little bit of a spoiler, because, like, you know, about midway through, I think maybe like that, like midway through the film, there's a moment where they talk about like the blood of Christ, and there's talk about how, like, you know, believing that it becomes like a part of the religion is a matter of faith, and that you have to place some trust in it. And once that scene happens, you immediately know how this film is going to end and how they're going to defeat the demonic nun. So, you know, with all the exploring they do, and like the, you know, the intrigue and the mystery, and trying to like peel back the layers and figure out what the demonic nun is going to do next, and who's possessed, and who they have to watch out for, and who they have to protect. You know, you can kind of see like the rigid track that's been built here. And at that point, it's less a matter of whether or not is the story engaging, and whether or not it's got some good fights and some good kills. And here and there, it's actually got some decent bits. I think definitely the biggest highlight of the film is there's a moment where I believe Sister Irene is on the street, and she passes by this newsstand, and the wind kind of blows by, and it whips all the pages of like these magazines into a certain order, where it lays out a similar shape to the nun. That looks incredibly accurate, and just like the way that it's framed, it's creepy. The way that it comes about is pretty clever, even if it has to rely on like the flickering lights so that the nun will like come out of the pages. That was still a pretty good fright. And in fact, I would actually say that by the time the film gets to that scare, it kind of peaks, because up to that point, you've had like the nun existing behind like the shadows and only coming out here and there to like frighten somebody or murder somebody. And after that point, the nun comes more out of the shadows and it's less intimidating. Like, because I was thinking about when this character was at her creepiest, like, and I thought back to the scene, I believe within like The Conjuring, where they're in the room with a painting of the figure, and then you kind of see like the shadow of the nun move out of the painting and around the room, and then it slowly comes out for like the big jump scare. And I love the way that was set up. Here, there's a scene where the nun is portrayed in like a painting, but she kind of like stretches out of the painting to kind of like chomp on somebody, but with that weird rubbery, like, you know, CGI effect of like, you know, trying to like make like paper jut out at you, that it's not as effective at the frights. It's actually pretty laughable at that point. I will give the film credit. It does try here and there with some scary bits. Like at one point, there's a demonic beast with horns that's just running around and trying to catch these girls. And at one point, it actually stabs one of them like through like the shoulder, I believe. Which I think is an interesting thing to bring up, that The Nun 2 is rated R. And it does have some bloody violence here and there, which I thought was kind of neat. Like I said, like the horn that goes through, like, you know, it's obviously CGI, you know, and that girl, she's injured, but you could kind of tell like she could still be all right if she keeps going. And then when you get to like the big CGI sequence of like the demonic nun kind of floating above them, and she's using her magic powers to section off people, and she's possessing this guy Maurice, played by Jonas Bloquet, and it's just like, you know, you can see all the wheels spinning, and you know, it's competently assembled, but like it's just not hitting the way that I would like to for, you know, like for a horror film to like effectively scare. Like they're like, I'm not the biggest fan of the Conjuring films, but the Conjuring 2 actually did have some pretty clever and creepy moments, and the Nun 2 is just kind of like, it's trying to find what else you can do with the character, with the central figure, to like make her more scary. And the more that she comes out into the light, the less frightening she is. Like, you get, like, if you're worried that like the nun is going to be too obscured in this film, don't worry. There's a lot of like close-up shots of her. You could see a lot of her expressions. It got to the point where it's like, if you're going to get that up close and personal with the character, you might as well give her some lines. Might as well, even if it's just something like, you know, like, I'll swallow your soul or something. Just something a little bit more, so that she's a bit more interesting, instead of just being the, you know, this sinister smiling nun who's, you know, like uses her magic powers and occasionally hisses at you and comes out of the woodwork to bite you. I don't know. I felt like there should be a little bit more there. I mean, obviously they don't want to go too far, because this is framed as like a prequel to the Conjuring films. They even have like another post-credit Easter egg of like showing how this connects into the Conjuring universe the same way they did with the first Nun film. But the nun herself is just so, you know, I will give credit, like, you know, Bonnie Aarons, who plays the nun, great job. She fits the makeup well. She has like a sinister appeal to her. She just needs, like, the film's got to use her better, because I feel like she's a great monster. But if you're going to bring her that much into the light, you know, at that point, it's just going to get to a point in the Conjuring series where you're going to have like the Nun versus Annabelle. Which, you know what? If they play it up that campy, I'd be up for it. Because at this point, like, the Nun 2 was getting into almost like kind of like so bad it's good territory in a few scenes. And I feel like we're almost to that point there where we just got to go full camp with this if it needs to be effective. Because otherwise, it's just going to come off more bland. Like, you know, the roller coaster horror of this nature can only go on for so long before it just becomes tiresome and not that. Even if, like, you know, you are those person who, even if you are a person who's easily frightened by jump scares and stuff like that, it numbs you after a while to like see this stuff. And even it's kind of the point where it's like there's barely anything that, you know, could scare, like, you know, avid horror movie watchers at this point. That honestly, I have a lot more fun just watching the audience of these films than I do like actually watching the film. Like, and I feel like I feel like the projectionist when I went to go see The Nun knew that, because like while I was watching the film, at one point the house lights came up a little bit, just a little bit, so that I could look at the rest of the audience while like the jump scares were coming and just get to see all the people who were easily freaked out. So I guess like that's my biggest enjoyment. But yeah, like compared to the first Nun film, it's on about the same level. It's like there's some decent scares here and there. And it's competently assembled, but it never engaged me with the story, and it never became terrifying enough or clever enough that I really got into it. And especially when you compare it to the Conjuring 2, which not the biggest fan of, but like I said, it did its job fairly well. So yeah, just very somewhat disappointed in The Nun 2, and it's mostly just because it doesn't really become that much better than the first Nun film. It doesn't become worse, but it just kind of feels like a wash at the end of the day. So, The Nun 2 is currently playing on Max. So yeah, 1 out of 3. That ain't too bad for horror films. Okay, so let's have a little outro music here. Okay, so quick recap of the films we reviewed on today's stream. We reviewed Five Nights at Freddy's, the horror film based on the hit video game series. Fans will probably love it because it has all the lore and the stuff that they recognize, but people who are not familiar with it as much, like myself, are probably going to be lost in its incoherent story and ineffective frights. We also reviewed VHS 85, a pretty good entry in the VHS horror anthology series. It's got a lot of clever bits and a lot of surprises with how it connects all these found footage VHS horror stories together. It's currently playing on Shudder right now. Go check it out there. And we also reviewed The Nun 2, a film that does little to improve on what 2018's The Nun did with the Conjuring universe. That is currently playing on Max Video. So if you feel like checking it out for yourself to see how creepy The Nun looks there, you can watch it there. Also, Five Nights at Freddy's is playing in theaters and Peacock as well. So you can watch all 3 of these at home this Halloween. So that will just about do it for the stream there. If you like movie reviews and you'd like to see more of them here, including early reviews that we got coming up here, be sure to like this video and subscribe, because we got a lot more reviews coming up here. In the next, I believe, I might be able to schedule it for next week. I think we can, yep. So in next week, I'll see if I can get around to streaming, because by then I will have reviews ready for the new Yorgos Lanthimos film Poor Things, which from what I've heard is basically an erotic version of the Frankenstein story. So that's enough to get me intrigued. And I'll also be reviewing the latest entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, The Marvels. So we got that coming up. And in the weeks ahead, I'll also be reviewing the new Disney film Wish, and too much else coming up. Like, what else? We got a David Fincher film coming up, The Killer. We got Thanksgiving coming up. We've got Next Goal Wins. We've got so many, Napoleon, just too much coming up in the next few weeks. So be sure to subscribe. Check back here. Be sure to check out my website as well, movieswithmark.com, if you want to see written reviews. In fact, you can find written reviews of all 3 films that I reviewed here today. The Nun 2, VHS 85, and Five Nights at Freddy's are all up on movieswithmark.com. So I'll be back next time with reviews of Yorgos Lanthimos' Poor Things, and review of Nia DaCosta, I believe is the director, the one who was behind Candyman. So yeah, we'll review Nia DaCosta's The Marvels as well. And then in about 2 weeks' time, when we'll be on Thanksgiving, I'll see if we can review Disney's Wish, Eli Roth's Thanksgiving, and David Fincher's The Killer. So until next time, I'll see you all later. So have a great Halloween. Watch some great horror films. Among those, if you have to watch one out of all 3 that we mentioned here, watch VHS 85. It's playing on Shudder. And I mean, Shudder has all like the great horror films there anyway, so you might as well go there anyway. So, all right, well, I'll check back with you all later. So, have a good Halloween.